We are one. We are. We are one. We are. We are one. We are one. And we are love. For we are one. We are. And we are light. We are. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same. Never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. Will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. Will never be the same ever again. never be the same.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. Thank you for watching. Got lots of comments already, Cherilyn. My special guest today is Cherilyn Christen Clough. Great to have you here with us. This has been in the works for a long time, and I'm glad we're finally having our conversation
Good to be here.
today. Great to have you here. For those who don't know Cherilyn, she is a woman of many talents, and she has recently released 2 books, author of Chasing Eden and To Uneat an Elephant. Now, Chasing Eden came out a couple of years ago from memory. Is that right?
5 years ago, actually,
5
it came
years.
out right before the pandemic, and
What?
then I thought I would have the other one ready, but it took me another 5 years to finish the second one.
I cannot believe that time has gone so fast. I loved
Yeah,
Chasing Eden. Great book. It's one of those books you just start reading and you think, wow, and you just can't put it down. So not just because of the content, but because of the skill of the author. Do you know what I mean? Some people write books and
thank
the
you.
content keeps you going, and sometimes people write books and the content and the skill keep you going. So it's a great
I
book.
write with my heart.
Right. Actually, I'm going to use this opportunity just to quickly bring up on the screen, and hopefully we don't lose your audio. Yesterday, I brought up on the screen when I was interviewing Graham Hood, his website, and the audio went off. So let's cross fingers. But that's To Uneat an Elephant, available there online. It's Kindle at the moment, but will be a
Yeah, in a
paperback
couple of weeks,
soon.
we'll have the paperback.
And the other one, where am I?
It's been the number one in young adult teen emotions and feelings
I saw that.
for the whole week since I put it up there.
Yeah,
So
I saw
I
that. It
feel
came up
honored
when
about that.
when I went to search for it. There's the other one that it came up. It came up that it was the number 1 book in that genre. There's
Yeah.
Chasing Eden, a memoir, and that's
And this
available.
one was number one for a while, but that was 5 years ago.
And that's Kindle and paperback. And look,
Yes.
$5.45, incredible price there as well. So
Yeah, that's on Kindle. And
I
you can read it free if you have Kindle Unlimited.
right. Well, I recommend people go and buy both those books. $10 spent. You'll be reading it tonight. I'm very
And
glad you did.
it's not for everybody. Memoir isn't for everybody. And memoirs about people who had sad childhoods living in dysfunctional church and families is not everybody's cup of tea. So that doesn't offend me if people aren't, interested in it.
Yeah.
The people who are interested in it are happy to find it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, people are what's that saying about when the student is ready, the teacher will come, or something like that.
That might be certainly true in my life.
Now, I'm just going to address a few of the comments here before we get started. It's great to have. Oh, I like this one. Here's James Andres. How are you, James? Another adventure into SDA Q&A land. All on board. I like that. Andy Max watching again today. Good to have you
It's a
here,
unique
Andy.
land.
And what's that?
It's a unique land.
It
I
is a
like the
unique
fact
land.
that it brings Adventists and former Adventists together and we can have discussions.
When I was chatting with and good to see you, Andy. When I was chatting with Graham Hood yesterday, and I knew it would be controversial, but I was pleasantly surprised that I think people are finally getting what I'm trying to do with this channel, with this station, this program, whatever we call it, where we can actually hold a space where we disagree with people, or we might not even like what they're saying, but we just listen to people and find common ground. And everyone was pretty civil in the comments. And I think you shared something off air that you watched it and was pleasantly surprised.
Well, when I saw that I was lined up next to an anti-vaxxer, my first impression was, oh dear, what did I get myself into? Because I firmly am quite on the side of vaccination. I've been vaxxed 4 times. My ex worked in a hospital. I have 2 friends that are Adventists, emergency room physicians, women. Both of them were pretty firmly supportive of vaccination. So I have been surrounded by nurses and doctors and medical therapists and stuff who were not concerned about the vaccination as much as they were about the virus. So but I also don't want to my whole family has been split over everything,
Yeah.
and vaccination was where everybody split up. I was the only one that got vaxxed. Everybody thought that I was going to make them sick.
Yeah.
So when I saw that, I thought, oh no. But, I listened to the interview and I found that Graham was just a wonderful Christian gentleman. I feel
Yeah.
like if I lived near him, I would join him in his Church Without Walls. He has the heart of Jesus. And I like the same by Maya Angelou. She says, we are more alike than we are unalike.
Yes.
And so I love that. And that could
Yeah.
be the motto of your podcast here.
I like that. Yeah, you'll have to send
we
me
have
that quote.
so much more alike than we have not alike. And
Yeah.
And I was surprised how much I liked him.
Yes, I know.
I was a little biased, and people are probably going to be biased about me to say that I've been vaxxed 4 times, But the truth is, I don't believe that anybody should decide for another person what their health situation is. You don't have that right. I don't have the right to say that for anybody, and nobody has the right to say that for me. We should respect each other.
Especially when you feel free that you can ask the questions. That's kind of my big thing. I'm not so interested. Like, for example, we'll talk a little bit later about women's ordination, and I know that I have a position on that, and I'll speak up and share my opinion. But I don't mind if someone says, "Look, I've done some research, and based on the evidence I've found, I think that women shouldn't be ordained." I'm okay. Well, I'm more interested in how people got to that, and can we just keep being friends anyway? And sometimes you don't have to be friends with people. You can go, I don't really like what they're saying, and I'm just not going to be their friend. Like it's not like common ground, or let's be lovey-dovey and love each other regardless. It's just, hey, well, let's get together. Let's find common ground. Some of us will remain friends, some of us won't, but you don't have to be. I think Jesus would be the one saying, hey, let's gather together,
Yeah, we don't have to agree to be friends.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, I saw somebody here said they're from Battle Creek and in the home of the Tabernacle. I just want to say my great-grandmother went to that church. My great-grandmother worked for John Harvey Kellogg, and she worked in his candy factory.
Get out of
in
here.
1908 and 1909.
What? Yeah, Fred Simmons.
So when I see that, it's like, that's an interesting.
In the shadow of the SDA Tabernacle. Yeah. Well, you were saying that you were 6th generation Adventist, or are 6th generation Adventist, and I find that fascinating. I'm 5th generation, and we love if you're generational Adventist, you love saying it. I love putting it out there. That
Well,
not to kind of lay claim to some holiness, but it's like this is kind of.
It doesn't make us any better than. It doesn't make us any better that joined last week or that left last week or anything. The thing is, when I say that, I'm letting you know at a point where my family came from.
Yeah. And
because when everybody in your family only has been vegetarian for 3 to 5 generations, and everyone in your family doesn't take showers on Sabbath, I mean, you can get steeped in legalism after you've been in the church for several generations, or you could just go way off the other end. My family was pretty steeped in legalism.
Yeah. And I'm surprised when I talk to some Adventists, so perhaps the more progressive Adventists, when they are like, how could that be? How can people say that Adventists are legalists? And yet everyone's got a story about how legalistic Adventism actually can be.
Yeah. I don't know who can ask that.
I know. Just back quickly to what we were talking about yesterday. I think being able to ask why is important, because someone said to me, and I checked it up later, they said, well, what about whooping cough? Would you have been against those vaccinations? I'm not it's not that you're for or against, but I researched, and when whooping cough was in its kind of heyday, you had a 10% chance of your child dying if you didn't have the vaccine. And so I'd be going, yeah, with that assessment, I think I will be taking the vaccine. But if it's only 0.01%, that just means you can have a conversation about, well, would we just keep them away from everyone? It just means you can have a discussion on it. Someone else said, oh, so you'd be against seatbelts in a car. Well, if you don't wear a seatbelt and your car has a crash, you've got a 50% chance of dying, higher chance of dying. So that if you look at the stats, you look at the data, you can make informed decisions as a community or as an individual as well.
I like something that you said, not to keep going back over to yesterday, because I said I didn't really want to discuss vaccine, but you said science never, you or Graham, one of you said science never stops, never says we've got all the answers. There's always more answers. We're always learning. And when it came down to COVID, nobody knew. It was called novel for a reason, because it was a new strain. And so there's a lot of things that people didn't know, and we know more now, but we still don't know it all.
Yeah.
And so I think science, if we're going to embrace science, we have to remember that science could be wrong. Science is learning all the time. I mean, let's be open to what's going on.
Yeah, science wants to measure things and then remeasure them and keep analyzing and keep science has never said the science is closed on this. Let's bring up a couple of quick comments. The one Motor Sapien I do want to quickly address. Does anyone get notifications that Peter's going live? I don't, and end up just refreshing periodically. Unfortunately, that is the only way you can do it. Yeah. Look, I will research that. I know that on YouTube you can do some kind of a countdown thing that says we're coming up and that says the time and date, and you know, and you just click and you're there. But I'll look into that, Motor Sapien. And so here we go. Okay, we've got I asked earlier where people are watching from, and Kelly in Currumbong, just down the road from me. And one last quick thing we'll raise now, and then we're going to get into our conversation. Motor Sapien asks you, I'd be interested in how you stand on the legalism from having grown up in what seems to be a staunch family. And that is what we're going to talk about. So let's talk first about who Cherilyn Christen Clough is. Take us way back. You can even go back to the 6 generations if you like. Tell us who you are and, bring us up to speed.
Well, if we go back a long ways, one of my grandfathers was studying to be a pastor in the Church of England at the church that Charles and Diana got married in. His father was a banker, and we're talking the 1800s, and he had children were born all over the world because this man was a merchant and he traveled. My great-grandfather was the second son, so he was told to work for the cloth, to become a pastor. And at his ordination, he decided to ask. He felt concerned because nobody talked about the Saturday Sabbath. So he asked a question. He said, why is it that we keep Sunday but not Saturday? And immediately his ordination was closed, shut down, and all the blue bloods that were there in attendance were shaking their heads. His father came to his room that night and gave him a one-way ticket on a ship called the Baltic to America. And he said, you've embarrassed the entire family, son. You need to leave. And it was a one-way trip. I can only imagine how my great-grandfather felt standing there on the edge of the ship, staring at the ocean, wondering what in the heck happened? How did I end up here? What's going on? God, where are you?
Can you just go over that again? That just flew by with so much explosiveness that I kind of
So he was supposed to be ordained in the Church of England, and at his ordination ceremony, he asked about the Sabbath. He didn't know anybody that was a Seventh-day Adventist. He just asked. How he thought to ask then seems ridiculous.
Wow.
But his dad, they shut the ordination down because they decided he was, a heretic. And his father sent him with a one-way ticket that night to America.
That is insane.
And I've seen a picture of his, thing in Ancestry where he went on the Baltic ship. And when he got to America, he became a common farm laborer, and he moved across the street from a family. And that family had a girl named Sedora, which she was pretty, he thought. And he struck up a conversation with Sedora, and she told him that her family had just become Seventh-day Adventists. A call porter had been coming through town, and supposedly every time the call porter tried to leave their house, he got dizzy and fell down. So he stayed long enough to tell them and about the Sabbath and baptized them all, and then he was well and went on his way. But the cool thing for my grandfather was he found a woman who liked the Sabbath, and he liked the Sabbath. And so they got married, and they had 2 children, and one of them was my great grandfather. So that was my great great grandfather, and his parents, I guess back in England, they eventually became Seventh-day Adventists over time, but that was many years later. So then my great grandfather became an astronomer. Some people have heard of him. His name was John Mellish, and he's lived around California, Southern Oregon, and he discovered the craters on Mars and several other comets and stuff. That was their son. So anyway, my great grandfather was pretty staunch Adventist, spent all of his time studying the Bible, and his mother did too. And my grandmother, his daughter, she was very, you might call her an Ellen White disciple. She spent a lot of time with Ellen White's books, like every morning, reading them, marking them. She read through the Conflict of the Ages every year and her Bible. And if there was a question, Grandma knew the answer. But the thing about Grandma, even though she believed in Ellen White and she was really aligned into that, she also believed in Jesus. So her religion she was legalistic in many ways, not taking a shower on Sabbath and not cooking on Sabbath. This is how my mother was raised. So my mother and father, well, they had that background. And my father's grandmother rode a horse across North Dakota selling the Great Controversy. And she was a Danish immigrant. She came here from Denmark and then turned into a call porter, I guess. So I have this steep background of people that were just really committed to this church.
Yeah.
And then there's my dad, who I think had some sort of a mental illness. And my mom, who was neurodivergent, she had OCD and was very full of anxiety. She just passed away a month and a half ago. And I think, we've kind of come to the conclusion she might have had some form of Asperger's, but she was functional to some degree. She just couldn't use the phone or call us or write letters. So you never knew for sure that she loved you unless you went out of your way to talk to her. But so growing up in a family like that, where my dad couldn't make a living and couldn't decide what he was doing and moved us every few months, and then made us lie to the church and say that we were homeschooled when we weren't. And my grandpa and grandma, they thought my dad was crazy. My grandpa told me, you don't know how many times I wanted to whop your dad upside the head for taking off with my daughter and my grandkids all the time. So, my stability came back to that grandma that read Ellen White and my grandpa, and they didn't agree on everything either. My grandpa's mother was the one who worked for John Harvey Kellogg in the candy factory, and his parents got together by a case of mistaken identity. I put their love letters, which we found 100 years later, into a book called Love Letters 1909. It's on Kindle and Amazon. You can read it free on.
I saw it on there this morning.
It's just a bizarre story about how she thought she was writing to a different guy, and he had the same name, so he answered her as a joke. And then they ended up getting married, and that's my grandpa's parents. And he was a firm Baptist, and she was a firm Adventist, and they discussed temperance issues often in their letters, because that was what was going on in 1909. So anyway,
that's the book there, I think.
So I have all this Adventist background coming at me from all directions, but my family, I wouldn't call them staunch. My dad, I don't know. He did dishonest things. He did crazy things. And my mom was honest. She was staunch in those ways. She didn't. But she also, I looked at myself when I got in the camera here, and I realized my mom wouldn't want me to wear this shirt because it has stripes, and an overweight woman should never wear stripes that go across. She also wouldn't want me to wear a necklace, which my sister gave me this elephant to celebrate the fact that I have an elephant memory. And she also thought she prayed that I would have curly hair. All her kids have curly hair, but I straightened my hair. So I was thinking, if my mom was alive, she only died a month or two ago. But you know what? I hate to say this. There's a saying that says, don't live in such a way so that when you're gone, people miss you, not feel relieved.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean I don't love my mom.
No, but
I
it's
love her more than
yeah,
probably anybody in the world. I loved my mom,
yeah,
but I also never felt free to be myself.
yeah.
And
Wow.
that's why I wrote these books.
Yeah,
Because between my mom and dad and their crazy religion versions of Adventism, in the fringe that I grew up in the isolation, I had to write the story because it was just too weird. I mean, I wanted to remember it, and I even had the whole family mad at me when I wrote the first book.
I was just going to ask you what was the
So
reaction, because
I'm the bad girl. I'm that naughty girl who opened her mouth and told the family secrets.
when I read the book, I'll just bring it up on the screen, and I brought up the love letters one a few minutes ago as well, just to share. When I first read this, I don't think, because you and I had met through the women's ordination page. I'd kind of gone in there because my daughter was only 2 at the time when the whole Antonio thing happened, and I was wanting to learn about what people were talking and thinking about the no vote. And then we kind of struck up a friendship. And later on, when you wrote the book, and I read it, one of the things I wanted to ask you was, how did your family respond to that? Can you share what some of
Well,
the
I
thoughts were?
didn't actually tell my mom and dad because I figured that my mom and dad, it would just hurt them, and I wasn't writing for them, and I wasn't writing to hurt them. I did tell my sisters, and my brother doesn't really, he's kind of not involved with my life. He's gone a different route in his life, and we don't talk a lot anymore. And that makes me sad. And you will see that in Uneat an Elephant, I really love my brother and that he's really an important person to me. And I also put for him in the forward because he's, and I hope he reads it. But in our family, we weren't allowed to speak against the status quo. The 4 of us kids as adults, that's what Uneat an Elephant's about. We're not allowed to talk about the fact that we're beaten with a belt, or that we moved every 6 or 7 months or 8 months, or that we didn't get into high school education. That my youngest brother and sister had a 3rd grade education. My next sister had a 5th grade education. I had a 6th grade, 3rd grade. All of us had under 6th grade for an education when we left home. And our parents didn't let us go to high school or have any homeschooling books. So, but we still had to lie and tell the church people that we were being homeschooled. I had to hide in the shed, as you remember from Chasing Eden.
Yeah.
So many awful things happened, and we couldn't talk about them because my dad's ego would get upset, and he didn't want us talking about it. And my mom would be hurt because she didn't want people to think bad about our family. It's just like one day I woke up and I was so upset. I went to a women's group. I lived in Lincoln City on the Oregon coast, and I went to a women's group, and somebody asked me where I went to school, and I said, oh, I was homeschooled. And then I always said, but my parents forgot to buy the books. People would laugh, but I wasn't laughing. That
No,
was the truth.
that
It
was
was
the
my way
truth.
of telling. That was my way of still saying the lies that they told me. I was 45.
Yeah.
I was still saying the lies they told me, but then making that little disclaimer, but they forgot to buy the books, because then I felt like my conscience was safe. And I just went home and I looked in the mirror and I just literally started crying and screaming at myself in the mirror. And I said, why can't you just be yourself? Just be yourself. I was so upset. And during that time, my brother was getting a divorce, and I chose to be friends with my sister-in-law because it's a long story. My brother was walking around with a gun looking at his family in the middle of the night, and I asked him if he ever thought of using it. And he said, all the time.
Wow.
So I told my sister-in-law, and that ended me being the bad person the first time. Everyone in my family was mad. My parents wrote a letter to the divorce attorneys of my brother's divorce and said, our daughter Sherry makes up stories about her childhood, and she lies all the time. She's a religious fanatic. And I was so hurt that I went to church that day, and my doctor was in my Sabbath school class. And I literally felt like I blacked out. I didn't know what was wrong, and I felt really weird. And they came around me in a circle, and they're like, are you okay? I thought I was having a heart attack, and my doctor said, I think you're having a panic attack. And that was the beginning of me having panic attacks when I went to church. And I think I've always been set up to have panic attacks in church because of being belted for making noise in church when I was a little girl. But the fact that my mom and dad lied about me in such a horrible way, I went home that week and I didn't open my windows and I didn't cook. I didn't clean my house. I just didn't do anything. And there was a lady there who was almost 80 and her name was Mary Lou. And she came to my house and she texted me. It was the beginning of having cell phones then. She texted me and said, "Are you okay, Sherry? I'm outside your door." I didn't answer because my house was a mess. I don't want anybody to see what a mess my house is. You know, my mom raised me to think everything had to be perfect. And Mary Lou said, "I'm just going to sleep in my car and because it's going to get late. If you don't answer me, I'll sleep in my car tonight until you need me to talk with." And I opened the door because I couldn't let this lady sleep in her car. She came in, threw her arms around me, and did my nails. And my mom didn't believe in nail polish, but Mary Lou did. And she opened all the windows and she said to me, "I would be so proud to have you for a daughter." And she's passed away now, but you know, when she did that, she transferred all my fear and pain that I had to her to realize that there is a mom person that loves me, who cares about me, and I'm not alone in the world. And Mary Lou just became the dearest friend to me that even after I moved away, she called me every Friday to wish me a happy Sabbath. And when she was dying, I cried and she said, "Don't cry for me, baby. The next thing I'll see is Jesus." And in case anybody here, I know there's a lot of people who get pretty bummed out by people who are hardliners in the church. Mary Lou was not a hardliner. She married a dairy man. She had 6 little children and her husband left her, and this dairy farmer married her. And then he had claimed mountain upon mountain upon mountain, and then he ended up with MS. And they stayed together until he died in his 80s. And I had the privilege of seeing him. He couldn't move any of his body, but I held my hand out and touched his hand, and I could see into his eyes that he was a man among men. This man who took care of her and her 6 children. And Mary Lou, he was never an Adventist. He didn't even believe in God until maybe right before he died. I'm not sure if he did or not, but he was a good man. So Mary Lou didn't judge anybody, whether they were an Adventist or not. She didn't look at people that way. She just looked at people as people. And I really learned from her. I thought to myself, when I grow up, I'm going to be like Mary Lou. And Mary Lou encouraged me to write my story. And that time, there was another lady there named Julie, and she was really sweet. And she said, "You know what, Sherry, your story reminds me of this book, The Glass Castle. You've got to read that book, The Glass Castle." So she gave me Jeanette Wall's Glass Castle, and I read it. And that made me realize I can write my book, because girls that were poor and that grew up moving all the time, there's no shame. Jeanette Walls took the shame away for every girl that was like her and me, that had to move, who grew up in stark poverty, scrambling for food, wondering if we could stay warm tonight. She took away that shame, and I realized my stories could do that for someone else. So that's why I wrote my books.
Gwen Wilkinson Slight, who's watching on Facebook, just wrote, "Wow, I already want to read your books."
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. So tell us a little bit more about your dad and this moving around all the time. What was motivating him to do that?
He was inspired by the time of trouble and the end of the world, and he believed that we should get further and further into the country, into the mountains, because we'd be safe there. He also thought that we couldn't have social security numbers. You'll see to Uneat an Elephant, I left home and didn't have a social security number. Tried to get a job at Harris Pine. It's in the first chapter, so I'm not giving away the book. And I tried to get a job at Harris Pine and found out, oh, darn, I have to have a social security number. And then I realized I don't want a social security number. I've crossed the line. I'm now with the world, and I'm going to die when, the wrong president my dad always said, as soon as the wrong president gets elected, then it will become the mark of the beast to have that social security number. So that's why we didn't give them to you. Now, he's changed his mind now that he's an old man of 86. But back then, that's the way we were raised. And it was always about becoming perfect. He taught me about Emil Andreasen, all the people that were the hardliners of that thing, and questions on doctrine was bad as far as my dad and them
Yeah.
were concerned.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Fordites, oh, that's what we called them.
Yeah.
You do not hang out with those Fordites. If my dad saw this video,
Yeah.
I pray to God he doesn't, because I don't want to hurt him. He's in a facility and he has dementia, and I don't want to make him sad or hurt.
Yeah.
It's just that the things that we believed and the things that we went through because of things that weren't even really true sometimes, it's amazing what fanaticism can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I sometimes get pushback for trying to say that there's two churches in one, and I'm generalizing. But when I heard you say Fordites,
There's two churches.
The whole reason that Des Ford connected with so many people is he gave them a pathway to assurance,
Grace.
of salvation, and grace. And
Yes.
essentially, if you do align, and he wasn't the only one, but if you align yourself with that kind of a gospel, you definitely have a line in the sand that's different to the Andreasen kind of Adventists, and they
I
know
don't believe
they
that
know
God,
there's a difference. They don't want to, they don't want the
and
Fordites.
I don't believe God's mopping down a building in heaven to
No.
cleanse the sanctuary. That people are at the sanctuary. And when we get that clear, it changes everything. In other words, there's a lot of mistakes that people made, and the church kept carrying it on and didn't clean this up. And that is always giving me cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
The two churches, I thought that everything was wonderful when I went to Walla Walla College, because these people were living like normal people.
Yeah.
They actually, lived in a house and had beds, bought groceries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then I also realized down the road that there was a lot of Adventists that look like, what I thought was normal people. I thought, wow, I'm saved and everything's great because I'm in the mainstream church now, because I grew up on the fringe. My grandparents weren't on the fringe. I'm just saying my dad raised me on the fringe.
Yes.
And then as I got older, I started seeing cognitive dissonance as I studied. And the more I saw things, the more confused I got, the more I was trying to figure things out. Probably one of the things that helped me the most was reading things from Graham Maxwell, because I stopped being afraid of God. I thought that God was like my father who was beating me when I didn't do what he wanted. And I went to this Good News tour, and it changed my life. It literally changed everything. I couldn't believe that the people that were in the Good News tour were actually eating out for dinner on Sabbath. That was a little disarming for me. I felt like, oh my goodness, they're all bad, and they're not good Christians, and but this view of Jesus. And one guy said, if Jesus was behind the door and the Father was behind the other door, which door would you want to go to? And I was like, I'm going to the door with Jesus, because he's a nice guy who saves me from the Father. And he said, but what if I told you that they were the same person, that they have the same character, they have the same alignment anyway? They're two unique individuals, that they said, but Jesus said, if you see me, you see the Father. The Father and I are one. I will no longer need to pray the Father for you, because the Father himself loves you. I couldn't believe that. And the next morning, there was a sunrise outside my hotel window. I got up by myself and stared at that beautiful sunrise. And I just said, God, could you really be that good? I mean, it still brings tears to my eyes to suddenly realize that God was not a controller. He wasn't out to beat me, that he'd given me freedom. And my favorite verse of the Bible is where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Because I didn't grow up with freedom. And often I will say to people, and I'm not one of these people who's an anarchist who doesn't believe in any laws, but I often sign things, peace and freedom, because the ultimate freedom that any person ever really had came from God originally. From the Garden of Eden on, we've had freedom. We just didn't know it. And God was better than we thought he was. I love that saying that they had at the Good News tour. They said, God is better than we thought he was, And that has always changed my life from that day forward. But I would also say That knowledge of freedom ended my marriage. That knowledge of freedom messed up my whole entire family because I chose nonviolence, non-fighting with people to just live a new life. And I didn't fit in for a long time. Now my two sisters and I are very close because we've gone through the death of our mother, and we're still caring for how we can care for our elderly father. So I think that drew us back together. But the truth is, my sisters were always wonderful people. We just didn't know how to trust each other because
Yeah.
we were raised.
Moto Sapien raised it. Moto Sapien just said, "Amen," that you didn't need to be hidden from God, and that
Yes.
ties into what you just said. If you're not hiding, that can be uncomfortable. You mentioned your marriage ended. It can mean that this can be a bit of turbulence in your life because you're no longer hiding that. Can you share a little bit more about? We've got Parade Orange that says, "Yeah, the Good News Tour, life changing." It's something I've never heard anyone mention before, but you mentioned Graham Maxwell before, and I know Motor Sapien talks a lot about him. Was he associated with this Good News Tour?
So the people who started the Good News Tour were Marco Belmonte and Brad and Dorothy Cole and Mark Marizan. There was a group of people who did this. And they did a really nice job of putting these together. I think they had a lot of spiritual warfare doing it. And I also think that their program brought a lot of questions. I mean, I would say that they kind of led people sometimes maybe away from the church because, suddenly you realize there's freedom. Suddenly you realize things, God's not exactly the legalist that we thought he was. In the case of you can probably still find them on YouTube. I'm not sure. I wish I could say more about it because it was in 2007 when I went to that. And I'll never forget it. It was December 2007. And I knew Marco because he had been a youth pastor at my church before that, but I didn't understand the truth about God or see anything like that. When Marco preached, I would have so many questions. I would be like, "Are you sure? Are you sure that's true about God?" And he'd be like, yeah. Here's the verses. Oh, here, he'd show me things. One time I said to him, because my husband was gay, I said, "Does God love gays?" And Marco said, "Of course he loves gays." So I thought, Marco was a safe person for me to talk to. And I think, and then I really helped Brad and Dorothy edit the book the book about God's character. And I didn't really know them, but they asked me to help. And that's how I started being able to have confidence in my writing. But the miracle for me is understanding that God gives us freedom. And that freedom ended my marriage in this sense, not because we got in a fight, but because we were driving to church one day and we were commenting on some people who had become pastors in Washington and moved to California and were pastoring a church in San Francisco with gay people. They were Adventists. I think that it was Shasta and Greg Nelson. And I said, "So they have gay people in their church that are married." And Raleigh said, "Yeah, like it was bad because poor Raleigh, he knew he was attracted to men, but he was living in the closet, basically." And so, I call him Dylan in the book, sorry. But anyway, try not to out him, but he's already out. I'm just saying, how you don't want to be the one talking about somebody.
Yeah.
So anyway, I said, "You know what? I don't know why God wouldn't allow two people of the same sex to love each other. I don't know why, because God's love. And if God is really love, how does that play out in our view of how we treat other people?" Honestly, I'm the one that brought it up, and it took a few more years for him to come out. But then when he did come out, and he only kneeled in front of me twice, once to ask me to marry him, and then almost 30 years later to ask me to unmarry him.
You see, that's a whole other incredible story
We
right
both
there.
cried. That's my next memoir.
Yeah.
We both cried, and I said yes, because I knew that he deserved the right to live as who he was, not just to be what the church had tried to make him be.
Wow.
And there will be some people who don't want to hear what I had to say about this. And people, honestly, I have issues with people who keep sending me these videos, so don't bother, you guys. I don't care about the Pray Away the Gay videos. I keep getting these from George Knight's wife, and I told her there's not one argument people can say to me that I don't already know, because for 30 years, that was my life. I tried to save my marriage. Don't you think I would try to save my marriage? I'm married to the nicest guy in the world.
Mm.
He's a musician too, Peter. He plays,
Yeah.
he's a tenor, he sings. I've never gotten bored of his music once.
Yeah.
I could listen to him all day. And he's the kindest man who fixed dinner for me. He's always treated me like a queen. I can pretty much say I'll probably never marry another man because I've been spoiled by my gay ex. Because I have been taken care of very well by a man. And I don't think anyone could live up to the way he's treated me. He's
Yeah.
always been such a guy. And so there's no fight between us. It's just simply, it was time for him to be himself and not have to. And there wasn't any sex for years at that point because, we decided this isn't really, you can imagine it's just not really the thing. So when we were first young and married, well, we tried that and then we moved on. We had a friendship for our marriage. And I don't feel ashamed about that. And I don't feel ashamed for him or me because we were raised in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And right now, you can listen to Ted Wilson rattle on about this, about how people should not even be friends with gays. He's out to get rid of the allies even. This makes me very angry. And that's why I'm writing another book. We'll talk about that later. But I was going to say, when we decided to break up, it did hurt me. And I was sad. But you know what? Do you know Bronwyn Reed?
Yeah, very well. Very well.
Bronwyn saw that I was upset because it was the beginning of the pandemic. Raleigh had moved out. And I said I felt so alone and I was crying and everything. And I told people in this little Facebook group we have. And Bronwyn said, I'll call you. Let's talk. And I thought, well, she lives in Australia. How is she going to call me, But she did. She spent, I think, probably a good hour with me.
Yeah.
And it was in the middle of the night for me or her. I don't remember which one, but she was so loving. I will never forget her. I will count her. I want to live next door to her in heaven.
She literally lives 5 minutes walk from me.
She's a wonderful person.
Yeah.
And she said, Sherry, you can choose to hold him hostage to the marriage vows, or you can release him and have a friend for life.
Mm.
And I said, you know what? That's what I want because he's my friend. I want my friend for life. And I will tell you, we had the cheapest divorce in the history of the United States, probably. We only paid one fee, just the fee to get the divorce. He agreed to give me alimony to pay for what I need to live off of. And I've returned part of it to him by letting him live in the same house that this house is paying for with the alimony. And he and his husband live in the other half of the house.
I know.
And
you
people don't understand that.
You introduced me to him before, and then you told me the story, and I was like,
"Yeah,
this is incredible."
So you
because,
thought,
I've interviewed a lot of people that are, gay, and they've talked about that they were married and Adventists and trying to do the right thing, but how it has really split the family. Their ex-wives hate them. They have trouble getting on with their kids.
Yeah.
And it's the saddest thing.
Well,
so when I heard you say that, I thought I didn't want to push you to talk about it, but I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did, because I know there's people watching that will take solace in what you're saying.
I can see how a woman whose husband was lying to her and didn't tell her that he was gay, or that he's doing something on the down low, or that he's pilfering funds, or, doing something dishonest. I totally understand that, why there would be arguments and fights, but that wasn't us. And the good news tour actually changed our lives, because while we were there, we heard somebody talking about using our power over others. And we made a commitment to each other that we would never use our power over the other person. We actually try to live that with everybody that we know. We try not to use our power over other people. And I think that's what made it easier for us, because we realize what's fair is fair. There's times that your feelings might be hurt, but you got to do what's fair. Like when Bronwyn talked to me, she realized, okay, but your feelings are hurt. You lost your partner. That's
Mm.
okay. It's okay to cry. She didn't tell me to be happy. She
Mm.
just said,
Yeah.
you can fight about this. And then I realized, no, I'm not going to use any power over him. I'm not going to get an attorney and use power over him. And
Mm.
he didn't choose to do that to me either. We agreed we wouldn't even serve each other with papers, because from my childhood, where my dad was always running from bill collectors and people were always trying to serve him with papers, it was so traumatic to me to think of somebody
Mm.
coming to bring papers to me. My heart would be up in my throat. I mean, even when somebody knocks on my door and I don't know and I've got all my bills paid, I still can't. I have to stop and breathe and get myself together to realize, oh,
Wow.
I'm not living with my parents anymore. I'm in a normal life. If it gets dark, I want all the windows pulled, because I don't want people to see in, because, there might be a bill collector or somebody out there that would hurt me. That's how I grew up, being hyper vigilant, and my mom had worst case scenarios for everything. So I was afraid of everything. And Raleigh is the person who protected me and kept me safe. And on our wall, we have a little saying that says, "In the shelter of each other, the people live." It's an
Wow.
Irish proverb.
Boy, I love that.
And I think that would sum up our marriage. We
Yeah.
sheltered each other. I sheltered him. He said he had hetero privilege by being married to a woman. Not that he should have, and he wasn't trying to go that route
Mm.
on purpose. It's just that the way the church was, he felt he had to hide.
Yeah.
And the way my family was, I was happy to have somebody who, we both worked, we made a living, we actually bought groceries and paid our bills on time. Although the first time that the pink bill came, I said to Raleigh, we don't have to pay it until the pink bill comes. And Raleigh's like, no, 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 we need to pay it now.
Yeah.
You don't want to live like that.
Yeah.
But it's because you grow up with that. You think that, oh, well, had to learn a lot of things. And Raleigh taught me a lot of things. And so I will honor him always.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that he is married and happy with his husband. I don't have any problems with them. They're nice
Yeah.
people and my best family.
That's an incredible testimony there, Cherilyn. I really appreciate what you've said there about power, that Irish proverb, where if you're creating a shelter, that's how people thrive, by not handing out papers and going at them and making people's lives, by not misusing your power.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful lesson, and it's something I think adults can learn when they're guiding children as well, like to not abuse that power, that just by being a bigger person you can
Yeah.
so easily impose upon young children as well.
I like something that you just said there, because a lot of people think that we can use our power by forcing someone to believe something or see something.
Mm.
I grew up with the steps of Christ in my hand.
Yeah.
And I mean that literally, because I was taught to memorize it. I was taught to say, when God's people perfectly reproduce the character of Christ, then Christ shall come to claim them as his own.
Mm.
All these verses. Oh, I just lost one of my earbuds. But earbuds. But anyway, and then we went door to door handing out steps of Christ. We covered the entire city of Oak Harbor, Washington, on
Mm.
Whidbey Island when I was between 10 and 12. And every Sabbath we went out and handed out those steps of Christ. And I knew what to say. I knew to say, "Hi, I'm from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I've got a free gift for you." And then if they asked me what we believe, I could say, "I believe in the 5 C's. Christ, the creator, who gave the commandments, who died on the cross, who's coming again." And then if they asked me about the Sabbath, I had a Bible study, proof text all up my sleeve to give to them. And I can tell you a few people did come into the church, and sadly, one of them helped Timothy McVeigh with the bombing in Oklahoma City. So anyway, so much for the converts that I brought into the church. Haven't been very successful. And that guy's in jail now because he sent a bomb to someone in Arizona.
Wow.
And when I look back on it, I realize I was a Bible thumper. I was raised to be that way.
Yeah.
But I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know
Wow.
Jesus when I was a kid and I read my Bible. All I knew is how to tell you the state of the dead and the spirit of prophecy, all these proof texts. I could give you chain references. I could spit them out. even when I was 10 or 12 or 13 or 14. And my mom and dad would say, you have to have personal devotions every day. And our personal devotions it wasn't sit at the feet of Jesus and think about what it would be like for Jesus to be walking around in Galilee loving on people. It was figure out how to convert the neighbors that you can't talk to on Sabbath because they're not Adventists. But if they became Adventists, well, then we could talk to them on Sabbath,
Yeah.
And so I was trying to convert every time I moved to a new town. I wanted friends. I was trying to convert somebody so that I could hang out with them because my parents were so strict. And the reality is, I don't believe in handing out those books now. I feel like people aren't ready for those books that we've been throwing at them and are using our power over people by saying, I'm a better Christian than you because I see things differently. That is using power over someone. And my books that you see, these two books and the one I told you that I'm working on right now, they're not books to tell people what to do or how to live. They're books that are just plain simply offering hope to people or telling a story. Because I want people to understand that they don't have to live in these boxes that we've been put in.
Yeah. They're books that inspire by showing you that there's kind of there's redemption without force, without forcing yourself to even find it. Or I've got to find my way. I've got to make it. It was a kind of a very gentle approach by just being honest and frank. In fact, Sherry Patterson in the Facebook group just wrote, "I love Cherilyn's honesty."
Oh.
Moto Sapien,
honesty. I love honesty.
Yeah. Moto Sapien wrote earlier, Cherilyn was the book you helped with.
Yeah, it was Servant God.
And then he answered himself, never mind, I just looked at my copy and your name's on it.
Yeah. So I really love those people that wrote in that book and the people that I was connected to at the Good News Tour. But I also was saddened to see that even though they had this beautiful view of God, some of them were very judgmental and very harsh. And one of the people that was hurt the most was Herb Montgomery, and I love him. I will never, I can't say anything bad about Herb. He's one of the best guys I've ever met.
And he was involved with the
He
Good
did.
News
He
Tour.
spoke at the Good News Tour. And what really made me pull out from that larger view community was when Herb was at a meeting and the people that were there were wonderful people, I might add. The theologians were just wonderful. But there was one man there who was trashing Herb because Herb brought up some theologians he didn't like, and he was just taking it down like Herb was stupid or something. And we were watching, and other people were watching live. We couldn't believe how Herb was treated. And then when I went back to the group, I said, how can we say we love each other and not use power over each other and treat someone the way that Herb was treated? And then somebody said, oh, what's wrong with you? Why do you care so much? And I'm just like, I care about everybody, and made me really sad. And I left that group, and I haven't spoken to many of those people in that group. And they were not the people that did the Good News Tour. This was the group of people that surrounded it. You know what I mean? They were the followers. And I find in Adventism, we have so many followers. It's like there's always a new guy to follow, usually a guy. Girls don't get followers. Have you noticed that?
Hey, you've got
Maybe
followers.
there's a segue there.
And I think
Except Ellen.
the whole reason for
Adventism seemed to have made it so that no other girl could ever get followed. She must have done something to curse us all.
Oh yeah,
I'm sorry,
that lady.
I'm being
What's her name?
sarcastic.
There's a lady, someone Rice. I'm going to get Steve Daly on the show to chat about her. And when Ellen White was here, living near where Bronwyn lives, just down the road, she got wind of this lady, and she certainly put an end to any dreams that this other lady, someone Rice, I've forgotten her first name, had of being the next prophet within the Adventist Church. She was kind of being hailed as this new prophet back there in the States while Ellen was over here. Something you just said there reminded me of a podcast I was listening to this morning. It's called The Final Shaking of Adventism by Roger Coon, Coon. And he's going through in his sermon all the people that have left the Adventist church since, like, I think he goes back to 1854. He starts going through there, and he goes through Canwright, and he's the thing that really struck me. Well, the main thing is he's attacking the player, not the ball. At every person he talks about, he never talks about the claims they made. He never refutes the claims. He never has any kind of rebuttal or anything to say about the claims to prove them wrong. He just attacks the person again and again and again.
Yes.
I just was listening to the Canwright section. He talks for 5 or 10 minutes on each person, and he's just being nasty, but in that classic subtle Adventist. They're so good at attacking the person, sounding almost like they're really being kind.
They did it to Graham Maxwell too. They'd done it to Steve Daly. I went to the same church with George Knight for 10 years, and I thought of him as a fatherly friend. But when I asked him what he thought of Steve Daly's book, the psychobiography, he didn't have anything to refute the points of the book. He only complained and gave me an ad hominem attack on Steve, which really made me curious and sad and upset. And I'm not trying to put George down, because I think George is a nice guy, but this is the Adventist way. It's the Adventist way that if you don't vote the party line, so Ford, Brimsmead, whoever they are, as soon as somebody's a little off, thinks a little differently, we can't allow people to think outside the box. If they start thinking outside the box, well, then they need to go. Let's just shun them. Let's ostracize them. I hate that. I feel like it's toxic.
Yeah, it's one of the things that annoys me the most about Adventism. There's this thread from the Adventist apologist that loves to diminish the person, destroy their character, poke fun at them in ways that are subtle, and they never address the actual topic that the person was talking about. And I find it fascinating, because they're trying to shut down the person, but it's a very effective way of doing it. And I think it's the lowest of the low. It's like it's bearing a false witness in the very commandments they hold up on high. They're bearing a false witness by what they're doing. And this guy Roger Kuhn, I don't know if the picture of him.
I'm not fond of him.
I've never heard of him.
And I don't want to do an ad hominem attack on him. I'm just saying that
if you draw first blood,
there's people that are just aligned with the Wilson dynasty, if you want to call it that. I'm not interested in that. I do not understand why God, with this many billion Adventists around the world, needs 2 presidents from the same frickin' family who are into controlling others and silencing the voices of women. Because if you've read Betrayal by Mary Kay McLeod, you know that his father tried to silence her. And it was only because, why? Because women wanted to be able to have she wanted to give women the same pay as men. And Neil Wilson didn't agree with that. And she was treated terribly. And so were the people that helped support her. And I feel like the same thing happened with women's ordination. Somebody said, was talking when I said, you said I was a champion of women or something. Somebody said, rolling my eyes. Because you didn't want to hear about someone who's standing up for women's ordination. Look, I'm not a pastor. I grew up in the church, and because men are treated up on a pedestal, men have the prayer, men have the sermons, men say the blessing over dinner. Women didn't when I was growing up. And I thought, why doesn't God love me as much as my brother and my father? Because obviously I had a lot to say. I can't shut up, can I? But
no.
And maybe it's because, my voice was taken away when my dad belted me and spanked me when I was 1 week old, because he thought that I was spoiled because I cried, which is how babies communicate with their parents.
I know, that's heartbreaking to hear that.
But I mean, I'm okay, but the other day, my dad has dementia. He's much sweeter now because he's forgotten what he held grudges over and everything.
Mm.
And we're having this really great conversation. And then he said, Sherry, I just wish I hadn't taught you to talk so much.
Oh, that's
Anyway,
crazy.
gotta love him, right?
Cindy Lou just wrote, re the ad hominem. It's an appropriate thing to say because the definition is attacking a person's character or motivations rather than a position or argument. Thanks for bringing that up because that is classic Adventist.
Yeah,
Classic.
and it's not that I want.
Any pushback I've had since leaving has been, oh, he's just got an axe to grind. He's a tool of Satan.
Yeah,
He's just angry. They're attacking my character and my motivations.
yeah.
They're not even looking at the position or
They don't
argument.
even. Yes, but I do owe you an apology because we had the women's ordination group,
You
people
you
that supported it.
you mentioned this off air, and I thought, no, you don't.
No, I want to make it clear. So, first of all, everybody probably who knows anything about women's ordination remembers that Doug Batchelor had a sermon right before Wilson became the president about women's ordination and how women couldn't do spatial things, so they couldn't do. It was like so many things reasons women couldn't be a pastor. Honestly, it was just a bunch of garbage. He thought they were angry lesbians. Honestly, give me a break, So I made a group that said, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, but Doug Batchelor doesn't speak for me. And overnight, hundreds of people joined it. But somebody said to me, why did you make a group about what you're against? Make a group about what you're for. And then I found the women's ordination. Somebody already made a group that said, I support women's ordination in the Adventist church. So I joined that group, and there was one man there named Andrew Dykstra, who's gay, and he kept saying, well, if we're going to preach equality for women, we should have equality for everyone, including the gay people. And people shut him down. Literally, people who were in charge got rid of his comments. And I felt like that wasn't fair, once again, using power over. So I started another group called I Support Unity, Equality in the priesthood of all believers. And it said in the Adventist church. We've dropped in the Adventist church off of it because half of our group are still in the church and half of them aren't. And, I don't want to make people feel like they don't have a right to be in a group because they're a member or not. I think I'm like you, Peter. But you came into that group because I invited you. And then you said, well, my little 2-year-old daughter, I don't want to be a part of this church anymore if they're not going to have women's ordination because I don't want her growing up in a church where she feels like she's less than. And that hit a nerve.
Yeah, that's interesting because you've almost quoted me exactly what I said.
It hit a nerve with me because I grew up feeling that way.
Yeah.
And so I agreed with you, but I wasn't ready to leave the church at that point. So I thought, Peter, stop talking about that in my group. And then you left my group.
Well, can I give a bit of a backstory to that?
Yes, please.
There's the other group which you were a part of, which was called I Support Women's Ordination or something. And I think you had some issues with them. And I wanted to join that group because, as you said, my daughter was 2 at the time when the Antonio vote came out, or not even quite 2. I think she was 18 months old or something. I just wanted to find out, well, what's everyone doing about this? And I saw that group come up, so I joined the group and I put my 2 cents worth in. And I noticed pretty soon on that, in my humble opinion, said with love in my heart, there was a lot of talk but no action. But whenever I would say that, people would say, oh, no, look what's happened over here, and this person's getting ordained, and look what's happening in California, we've ordained this lady. And I'd go, yeah,
hope.
there was hope, yeah. And I didn't want to come down on the hope. And anyway, someone said, well, what would you do then? It's like smarty pants kind of thing. What would you do, smarty pants? And so I said, okay, well, this is what I would do. And I wrote a list of thoughts that I had. And one of them was, just strike. Go to church, but sit in the foyer. Don't go into the main thing. And anyway, that was too much. And so they kicked me out of the group. And I remember seeing your group start up. And I think you'd seen some of the back and forth that I'd had in the other group, and you could tell my heart, and you were very supportive. And
Yes.
it's interesting to note then that you let me join that group, and I felt a lot of camaraderie. But you're right. I then did start. I then left the church and started
I feel like you
talking
were
about
trying to
that.
take my people in my group out of the church, and I wasn't ready for that.
and I,
Because I was raised Adventist. We
yeah,
can't let anybody be a free thinker.
yeah, yeah. And
Sorry.
I,
I'm sorry. I wouldn't do that today.
yeah, but you don't have to
That was
apologize because
that was 10 years ago,
yeah, but you don't have
It
to
was a long
apologize
time ago.
because I felt very accepted in that group, and I didn't
Okay.
actually leave or anything. I just remember thinking, you know what, it's why am I even saying stuff, because it's just ruffling feathers, and I'm not really wanting to do that. I love talking about any topic, and whether it ruffles feathers or not is not my goal. But I did feel very welcome in that group, and I never even felt that you were giving me any sort of trouble over that anyway.
We didn't really fight. It was just we had different visions for that group,
Yeah.
and I wasn't ready to hear that. I wanted to have hope. Down the line here, I think that we need a new president if there's ever going to be any Adventist church at all, because I feel like he's run the church off the rails. And I
Mm.
think that article by this man Kuhn that you were referencing is
Mm.
just a prime
Mm.
example of it,
Mm.
because they have become so consumed with the past that they can't think about how it's relevant in the real world. And they have all these baptisms, yeah. But Jesus also told the scribes and Pharisees that they make converts twice the sons of hell as they are. And when I see Doug Batchelor having a big campaign, I just think, oh, he's making converts twice the sons of hell as he is. So look, we've got another 40,000 Doug Batchelor sons of hell. Sorry, people. There's
Well,
probably someone here who loves Doug Batchelor, and I'm not trying to do an ad hominem on him.
well,
But he did tear women down,
and what's interesting to me
and
is
that's a
that
son of hell.
the church administration support Doug Batchelor like crazy. They'll bring him out over here, pay his way, speak at camp meetings, do special youth programs. But Herb Montgomery, he came out here, and I'm sure they were trying to shut him down.
Oh, Herb's wonderful, and
What?
he's
What?
got so many good things to say.
Yeah, I chatted to him a little bit over here on Messenger. He was staying with some friends of mine. What actually went down there? I didn't know what happened. He was kind of treated badly by the church, you were saying earlier?
Oh, he was just treated bad by someone who was in the meeting with him, who just plain harangued him.
Right.
And I think that person really tore him down. By the way, that person unfriended me and blocked me from his Facebook page too, because he had a quote up that was a Martin Luther King quote, but then he said that the people in Portland who were singing in a ritual, in a vigil for Black Lives Matter, and then the police came in and used tear gas on them. I had friends in that group that were doing that. They were not violent people. And this person, I followed him for a while. He said that they were violent people. I said, no, they're not violent. Not everybody's violent, just because someone is in that group, but they're not all violent. And let's not paint them with the same brush. And I said, you just put this quote up that said, when we learn to become silent about the things that matter, by Martin Luther King Jr. And now you're telling us to be silent about these things that matter. And that person, he did what many patriarchal men do. He said, oh, you always say I hurt your feelings. He never hurt my feelings. I didn't even know him in real life. How could he hurt my feelings? We're talking about something logical here. And he said I was being emotional because I stood up for the people who were having problems. And I didn't argue with him. I only questioned him only a couple times, and he blocked me from his Facebook page. So long for that part of the good news. But anyway, and I know there's people here who really like that person. There are people in Australia who follow this guy like he's a prophet. But this is my question. If he can't walk the talk, I don't want to hear about it, because I feel like if you don't have empathy, this is what happens when we start polarizing people. when you start assuming that all people who stand up for someone who's an immigrant, all people who get vaxxed or unvaxxed, if you assume they're all the same, you polarize people and you lose empathy. And I would say that teacher lost empathy. He lost his empathy. He saw a man and his daughter who drowned in the Rio Grande, who came from El Salvador, and he said, well, it was the father's fault. Design law. I believe in design law. Sure, the wages of sin is death, and whatever a man sows, he reaps. But Jesus also taught us the grace, like he gave to the thief on the cross. So, that's my little sermon for the day anyway. I think that it's good to have design law, but we have to remember grace, because truth without grace is brutal, and grace without truth is permissive.
Say that again.
I didn't make that up. I read it in a Henry Cloud book.
Yeah.
Truth without grace is brutal. And I feel like this person who's focused on design law all the time can get brutal at times because he lacks empathy for people, and it becomes politicized. I don't think our Christianity should be politicized. I know that it's hard to avoid it because, there's definitely problems, in the world, and we definitely have a messy world right now. But if we lose track of an individual's pain and we lose our empathy, we lose the heart of Jesus.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. Design law doesn't matter if I don't have grace. It doesn't matter if I don't remember how Jesus gave grace to the thief on the cross. That doesn't mean that we excuse people that are doing abusive things, but we still have to find a way to have grace as much as possible with the people that we're dealing with.
Marjorie Button has written, Cheryl is a beloved friend among our friends group. And she's put little love hearts there. Thank you for sharing your love for Jesus and gays.
I love Marjorie. Yes.
And Esther writes, wow, belting a week-old baby, it curdles my blood. She was talking about what your dad spanking you.
It curdles my... I had a really nice pastor and his wife a few years ago who had a little baby, and she was 1 week old, and they called me over to their house, and I told them about what happened to me, and they said, would you like to hold our daughter? And I held their little precious, adorable child, and I looked at her, and they said, do you understand what that was like? I couldn't ever hit her. You could never hit this baby.
No.
My dad was so fanatically wrong.
Yeah.
But Ellen White told him that he needed to. He got this from Ellen White, by the way, that she said that parents should bend the twig or bend the branch. I can't remember how it is, but they're supposed to train the child. And part of that is to, punish them if they get out of line, I guess. She's the same one that wrote to her son, Jesus doesn't love naughty little boys. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Angela Lima said an interesting thing yesterday about, Angela, if you're watching, what was the book you said yesterday gave you nightmares? The Ellen White one. I'm just thinking that the quote you just said, I think, may have come from that book. If Angela's still watching, just put the title up again for us. Fred Simmons or Simons. Fred, you're going to tell me, which way is it? I keep forgetting. Ted, if anyone can confirm this, is this a truth or is this, we've got to fact check this, Fred. Ted Wilson has his own line of sneaker tennis shoes that he sells, and it's lucrative. I can't remember the name, but he's had it a long time. Lots of Adventists own.
Is this a joke about Wilson?
I don't know if it's
Wilson
a joke
tennis shoes? Because isn't there a brand already called Wilson?
But I wonder is he saying that they're, anyway, who knows. And there's some interesting things there.
People make up a lot of funny stuff sometimes.
With Motor Sapien Right, Doug's picture of God is forensic as well. And when he gets boxed into a theological corner, we'll use the like it or not, folks. That's how it is, which is a horrible presentation of God. And again, I think, when I interviewed Alan Davis, which has been the most viewed of interviews I've done, he was the CFO at Amazing Facts, and he didn't once put Doug down. He preferred to look at what ideologies were wrong and what not. And I think when we're talking about this, I like what Motor Sapien said there. He's not putting Doug down. He's saying Doug's picture of God is forensic, and then
Yeah,
he's
I
saying,
like this guy,
yeah, and then he's saying
Modus Sapien.
that's a horrible presentation of God. One day we had an after show conversation. I can't remember which interview I'd just done. It was a bit of a spontaneous thing, and Motor Sapien came on, and I got to see him for the first time. He's very young.
Oh,
I
really?
yeah, he was talking about Graham
Seems
Maxwell a lot,
wise.
and
Yeah.
next minute, I don't want to be libelous or anything. So this is someone allegedly saying this. Fred, are you just giving us lots of little libel? Are you trying to get me sued? Three have been Danny Shelton. Oh dear, maybe I shouldn't read those claims.
Yeah, they're getting off track.
Yeah, let's get back on track.
We know there's a lot of abuse in the church.
There's a
It's
great.
just,
I love this book, and look, I'm so unorganized, but I'm myself and Adrian Anderson, who is a good friend of mine and helps me a lot with SDAQ&A. He and I have got this harebrained idea that we're going to put into practice. I'll often hold up a book and say, hey, I want to make this available to people and really cheap and whatever. And people write to me and say, yeah, we'll get a copy of that. Or I'll hold up, I've got 3 white lie.
oh, yeah.
And there's a bunch of books that I've got, a bunch of books, old books, new books. I love sending people to the links to buy your books as well. But there's a little aside talking about getting off track. But Adrian and I are going to set up a kind of a warehouse where he's way more organized than me. He'll house all the books. I'll give the promo on the show, and then people can write to him. And they like, I've had at least 3 or 4 orders of this, and I haven't even written back. I could have sold these copies for $150 each twice, but
Oh, yeah.
so unorganized.
When I
So
went to
that's
buy that, it was really expensive on Amazon.
I know, yeah. So
But I think they reprinted it since then.
we're gonna have this place where we're just going to store hundreds of books, and I will then tell people if they want to buy it or get a copy, they'll contact Adrian and he will make sure it happens. So, but this book, Who Watches, Who Cares? Misadventures in Stewardship, Douglas Hackelman, I've interviewed him on the program. That reveals a lot of what we were just talking about, that there's lots of misadventures within Adventism. And
Yeah.
you'd think that, yeah, of course, all movements have problems and flaws and faults. That is for sure. But you'd think the remnant church that has the last special, unique message for the end time, proving Satan's claim that people can't keep the commandments, proving that wrong, surely it would build up a little bit more of a movement that showed some more signs of trustworthiness than has been revealed.
It's bothered me that throughout my young adult life and then now that I'm middle aged, that every time I like somebody who seems like they're up and coming to the church, the next thing you know, there's a scandal.
Yeah.
It usually involves money. I mean, this has
Yeah.
happened so many times. I'm just like, what in the world next? What now? And I mean, I'm thinking there's been some recent scandals. I don't want to say things about those people because one of them used to be the Washington Conference president, and I actually really liked him, and he was all for ordaining women. I don't know what happened, how he lost his job. I mean, I just hate that either somebody is bad mouthing people and they're not telling the truth, or else there's really dishonest people who masquerade as really sweet, nice people. It's
Yeah.
why is it such a mess?
Yeah, it,
I don't find that in other churches as much.
yeah,
And I don't
yeah,
know if it's just because we have all this this inner enmeshedness in Adventism or something.
yeah. I've in my music, when I had music ministry, since 1983, I was playing for all the different denominations. It wasn't just for Adventists, and I remember noticing that the Adventist theology and doctrine permeated into our lives more than Baptists, Anglicans. The gospel permeated their lives, but Ellen White, the devil, am I saved or not saved? That stuff permeated way more than all the other denominations. They are a lot more
Yeah.
benign, and I mean that in a good way. They're benign in that they focus on the gospel, the teachings of Jesus, great youth programs. You know, they've got problems. They're movements. They've all got problems. We're not saying that, and they've got flaws and
Right.
faults and leadership issues, and they've all got, you know, they've all gone to the tribunals for child abuse. Everything is, you know, corrupted by human connection. But
Right.
I do notice that Adventism has this unique way of bringing its ideology into people's daily lives that is not benign. It's got a
Yeah.
little bit of a dangerous spiritual abuse aspect that I don't think people are willing to really look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's really sad.
Tell us a bit more about the new book. We've called it even our program, you know, Uneat an Elephant. What is the elephant that you're trying to uneat? And
Well,
tell us about how
when
that
I
book came to
when I was a
be.
little girl, my mom in her 1970s plastic blue recipe box had a recipe called elephant stew. Other people probably had one of those too because it was a common thing back then. And it said the way to make elephant stew is to cut up an elephant into bite-sized pieces and then add 2 chickens or 2 something else, you know, for flavor, and then add salt to taste. Well, I liked that recipe. I liked elephants. My parents said I had an elephant memory. I knew that it was not a real recipe because we were vegetarians. Plus, my mom put sauteed onion and everything. So there was no way that we would make an elephant stew. But the thought of an elephant stew bubbling at the back of our wood cook stove fascinated me. And I always thought about that, you know, and as I grew older, I thought, well, if I had eaten an elephant, you know, that would be gross. But then as I grew older and I read this about the elephant in the room, I started realizing I actually ate an elephant before I ever realized what I was doing. It was a different kind of elephant. It was a, you know, but how do we uneat that elephant? If you grow up with all these lies and dishonesty and all this secrets, how do you uneat it? How do you undo it as a grown up? It's pretty hard. And it was really hard for me, and I think it was hard for my siblings too, because we weren't allowed to talk about the elephant, even though we were all left home and young adults with our own spouses. Whenever we got together, we couldn't mention that we were homeschooled without any books and never got to go to high school. We couldn't mention that we were beaten with a belt, and we couldn't mention that we lied to people because our parents told us to. We couldn't mention that we moved every few months and never actually had a home. So what do you do with this elephant in the room? It's still there in the room. And how do we uneat it?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, this book is about my young adulthood and my quest to figure out how to be my own person. Because every time I tried to do anything, my mom and dad were very disappointed in me. You know, they were disappointed in my music. They were disappointed in my clothing and my makeup. And you know, everything I did was a disappointment to them. Probably the most biggest disappointment to my father was that I joined a singing tour when I dropped out of college because it's pretty hard to go to college with a 6th grade education.
Yeah.
And so I went with a singing group that was non-denominational, and my dad said it's ecumenical. And you know what Ellen Hoyt said about the holding hands across the Gulf with the Catholics and ecumenicalism is going to bring in the end of the world and you're going to be lost. And literally, I thought I was scared a lot of times on this tour that I would be lost. One day we were singing in a Catholic church. It was a big school, a university, and they had marble halls, and we were standing up there singing. And I imagined this big, you know, anthem in this big, huge cathedral. And I remember thinking to myself, this is just like in The Sound of Music. What if the Catholic priests come after us when we get done with our song? You know, I was raised with fear. Here I am, 23, still thinking crazy things like that. Because, you know, that scene in The Sound of Music where they sing and they run out to get away.
Yeah.
So I go out. My host family was waiting on me to get my bag out of the people mover bus we had. And I had to walk the dark through the street lights. And a man started following me. And I heard the footsteps behind me, and I thought, oh my goodness. I walked a little faster. None of my friends were with me. I was alone. It was in, I think, Minneapolis, Minnesota, or someplace like this. And I walked faster. And the faster I walked, this man was walking faster. And I looked around, and it was a man, he was wearing a robe. And my heart was up in my throat that this Catholic priest was coming after me. I thought, what's he going to do to me?
Wow.
I was so innocent that I didn't even think that he would try to rape me. You know how the children, all these sandals we have nowadays, that's not what ran through my mind.
No.
I thought he was going to force me to go to church on Sunday and take away my, my spirituality. I didn't know, because it's an ominous, nebulous problem. We don't know. And
Mm.
so as he got closer to me, I had to turn around. I thought I would maybe scare him off, and he held his hand out. And he said, "I saw Jesus in you." And I was like, "What in the world?" He said, "I saw Jesus in you. You gave a little talk, that little 5-minute talk. I saw Jesus in you, and I wanted to bless you. And I know that you guys have to raise money for your tour, so I wanted to donate." And he held his hand out, and I took it, and he turned around, and when I looked into my hand, there were 3 $100 bills. And I turned around to thank him, and he was gone.
You're gone already.
But he wasn't an angel. He was just a priest, and he went back to the church.
Back into the
But
church.
the thing that shocked me was no Adventist supported me on that tour. Not one Adventist, not my parents or my grandparents, nor anybody that I sent out probably 100 letters. No Adventist supported me because it was an ecumenical tour in 1987. And nobody thought that you should go with an ecumenical tour. You better go with an Adventist. We don't count that as a mission. So, the only person that was on the tour that was an Adventist with me was my future husband. So, and so that story's in the book. Some of it's in the book, about what happened and how, but that changed my life, because I realized that other Christians, people that drank coffee, people that wore jewelry and makeup, people that swore, people that kept Sunday, oh my goodness, people that owned a pig farm. They turned out to be better Christians than some of the people that I'd grown up with or knew. And I realized they loved Jesus. And that was a great motivator for me for the rest of my life, to try to find those people that love Jesus and think outside of boundaries of denomination. Because even though I will always think of myself as an Adventist, because I grew up in the Adventist church, everybody I know was an Adventist, I don't just think of myself as that. I haven't for years. I think of myself as a member of the Church of Jesus, and it's an invisible church. It's not a denomination, and it doesn't need marble halls for people to send their tithes to. It's just the people serving other people. That's why I loved Graham that was on your show last night. I thought, yes, this is it. That church without walls. That is where it's at.
Yeah. It's a great name, isn't it? Church Without Walls.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andy Mack just wrote and reminded me, just talking about yesterday, the book that Angela messages to young people. I don't even know if it's available anymore to buy.
I hate that book.
But I remember
my dad
that book
forced me to read it.
messed with my head too. My parents didn't put any of that stuff to me. It was more just you'd come across it and you'd read it, and well, here we go.
So there's nothing like it kills your life to read that book if you're a young person.
I'd love a copy of it, because I can't find my version of it all.
I threw mine out with a cat box.
In the cat box?
One day I just said, I'm done with this, and my ex was taking the garbage out, and he said, here's the cat box stuff. I'm taking the litter out. And I threw messages to young people in with it.
Moto Sapien has written, "You're both too kind to me. I'm extremely humble and grateful for your words. Cherilyn, I was honest with my earlier comment about your work with Servant of God. Incredible book."
I can't really take credit for that. I mean, I think it's an incredible book because of Dorothy Cole and Brad Cole. Those are the people I would give credit to for that book. And I was mostly an editor. I helped clean up
That's an important job.
I wrote a couple chapters, and I might say that they basically helped me write my chapters because I was new to this, That I have really high respect for them.
Yeah. Moto Sapien has also just asked, because you were talking about Jesus, this kind of hidden movement, not a hidden movement, but it's the movement that doesn't need to be defined by walls. It's about people discovering Jesus. He's asked, how would you define the gospel? Like, what's that kind of good news for you that you were talking about going to the Good News Tour, how it changed your life? What was it that changed your life? What message did you receive about the good news that changed your life? What was that gospel message?
That the Father is exactly like Jesus, that God's love is unconditional, that we don't have to do anything to earn his love, and that if we have made mistakes, he will help us,
Yeah. Colin, the ambassador, just wrote a funny little thing. He won a copy of Messages to Young People on Church Banquet in 7th grade. Classic. Imagine, Colin, how did you go that night? You go home, oh, I've won this prize.
What a terrible thing to give to kids.
Does anyone know if it is available still? Like, can you ring up your local ABC?
Oh, I'm sure it's probably still available somewhere. Somebody's still selling it in the backwater somewhere, Those people, the fringers that my dad, his buddies, they're out there selling it probably.
Yeah, I wonder.
The thing that shocked me about that was it was so much about masturbation and other things that I really didn't know about. So here my dad hands this book to his 12-year-old daughter and 10-year-old daughter. What in the world was he thinking? We didn't even know what the book was about.
Carl Wagner just writes, yes, Messages to Young People is still available. And Cindy Lou writes to CMB, the ambassador, booby prize, not a great prize.
Yeah. But somebody said something about Jean Sheldon. She is a wonderful person too. And she was a really big influence in my life. Her book, No Longer Naked and Ashamed.
Yeah.
And if anybody really ever feels like they are struggling with understanding, what happened with it, and she explains so much in that book. I'm sad that I gave a review to it on Amazon when I read it. And there's probably maybe 3 or 4 reviews on Amazon because she didn't really push her book or try to get everybody. She's a humble, sweet person, but she really does understand a lot of things. And I really gained a lot from her.
Yeah. She'd be interesting to have on the show maybe, and she could talk more about that book as well.
She would. I think she is a firm believer in Ellen White, and she doesn't see it the same way that I was raised to see it. She has a completely different perspective from it, but she's very humble and kind.
And I think it's good having the different perspectives as well. One thing that I've noticed, people will write and say, oh, you don't have enough the traditional Adventist on the program, or you don't have enough. There's always someone saying that I'm not interviewing, whereas if you listen to the interviews, see, I'm covering all the bases, don't worry about that. But it's because a lot of times they will say they won't come on the show. I would say I ask equal amounts of every single type of Adventist to come on the show. But one thing that people have said is, oh, you don't have enough women on the show sharing their stories. And I would say that as well, the same thing applies. I ask a lot, why are women more, like, there's obviously, you go into those women's ordination groups, there's passion, there's a lot of great stuff happening, there's movement at the station, so to speak. Why are they reticent to come on sort of public platforms and speak unscripted?
Well, I think that women weren't allowed to have that much voice in the past. I mean, I wasn't even allowed to pray over the blessing. The men did that. So they have to fight the cultural thing. But I don't think you would have a problem with someone like Jean Sheldon that. I agree with what he said here. Her work on Babylonian paganism and its influence on mainstream Christianity is eye-opening. She knows a lot about Far Eastern culture. She would be a fascinating guest if you could get her. You don't have, some people here don't agree about Ellen White. They don't have to. But you know what? She has a lot of knowledge. And I would sit at her feet for hours.
Maybe you could be.
I don't know her
you could
in
be
real
like
life. I just know her online. But Yeah,
But you
she's a
could be
great.
an agent for me and help bring women onto the program to share their stories.
Yeah, we could look for other
You,
women and see if
I'd
there's
like
other
that.
women out
Yeah,
there who
yeah,
would share their stories.
yeah.
I
I'd like.
think that we need equal. We need to
Yeah,
have some,
yeah,
because people need to know that women are Christians too, and that women have faith crisis and struggles too.
yeah. When I was in those two, your group and the other group, the women's ordination group, I did have a lot of people write to me behind the scenes saying, "We don't want men's help. Don't give us any advice." And I thought I respected that. I can understand why that was said. In my mind, I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be great? I thought, from my experience with very strong women in my life, strong father figure, very it was a very balanced, really healthy. I'm really grateful, for that kind of upbringing. But I'd had this impression, and as you know, we're chatting off air. My dad's 91, and I've felt my whole life that we were working together towards this equality, and I felt like, and I'm just speaking honestly, I might be wrong, just speaking without thinking. Um, that Sorry, thinking out loud. Um, that we were kind of getting closer to kind of equality and where everyone wanted to be. But when that kind of just trying to choose my words carefully, but when we kind of felt like I felt like we were coming onto that plateau where things were like, okay, here we are, we've reached this level together, let's move forward. It was like a bit of a swing back against men. Like, I can understand this anger against the can't speak in church and stuff, but what I've noticed is that um, I certainly didn't feel any privilege. I got on well with the grassroots, but I was constantly being put down by leadership as well. I don't
Hmm.
know. I'm just trying to. I'm just riffing here a bit. Where is there a path where we can work together, or does there need to be a little bit of a time of, look, just let women kind of speak and do it on their own for a while, or what am I trying to say? What's going on?
I I think when we were having the women's ordination movement back before we had that vote, we had a lot of men on board supporting women for that. And a lot of people understood the need for equality in the church. And I think that we took a huge, huge back step when Ted Wilson became president. And I also see that the way it was worded wasn't fair. So everybody was really voting on whether divisions could have the say for their own division rather than whether women, I mean, they ignored the whole TOSC study. Nobody
Yeah,
discussed that then.
yeah, incredible.
And so basically it was unfair. It was set up unfair. And I blame Ted Wilson because he's the president. You blame the president of the company. He wants to be the president. He should have helped make this, he should have made it clear and he should have made it fair. But it wasn't in, he didn't care because this is a man who, in a time in Australia, a woman was being, had to be, she couldn't be ordained. Two men were being ordained. I remember this, reading about it. And I think it was in Australia. And she was on the platform, and Ted Wilson didn't want to be on the platform with her while they gave her, what is the other thing that's not ordination anyway?
Commissioned.
Commissioned her.
Yeah,
And he couldn't be on the same, he didn't want to be on the same platform with her because he didn't, I mean, that was telling to me of a character. It's not about a character assassination. It's about what isn't done that should be done, that's fair and right and honest. And so, it's sad. I don't feel a lot of hope for the church as far as women's ordination anymore, as far as Ted Wilson in charge. The only way, and I felt so much hope when Jan Paulson was in charge. And I love
yeah,
Jan Paulson. I felt like when I was a young Adventist and Jan Paulson was the president, I was happy to be a member of the church. I felt like Jan Paulson, his message was to love people and love Jesus.
He
And I
accepted
was
a
on board with
diversity.
that.
Yeah, he
But
was
I
he
don't
was like
hear that.
unity through diversity, whereas Ted Wilson is
Yeah.
unity through uniformity.
Yeah.
Um,
So we took a huge step back, and I don't feel a lot of hope for women's ordination anymore.
Andy Mack responds to what we were talking about, getting women's perspectives spoken out in public on platforms like this. And she mentions shame. And I have had a lot of women saying that they're too scared to be shamed, not just by men, but by other women.
Yeah.
and keeping other people's secrets. This is why I find it hard to speak out, even though I have. Have you noticed that there's not just shaming from men, that women will shame other women for getting up sometimes? Because the
Oh,
biggest pushback
yeah.
I've ever gotten was when I criticized actual leadership. I don't get it so much now, but my first foray into criticizing TED, criticizing our own leaders over here in Australia,
Mhm.
the biggest pushback was from progressive Adventist women who told me to stop criticizing our leaders, that God had a hand in it. It was going to come good. Stop being negative. That really
Yeah.
astounded me.
At the last church I was at, there were three women elders. None of them supported women's ordination. One of them told me, "Oh, I don't care about that. It's not worth it. Who cares?" And it really made me sad. And I wanted to put those buttons that we had, the women's ordination buttons, I wanted to share them right before the vote. And my pastor, who was a saint of a man, and I'll always love him, but he said that, there's some people in this church who, will be just outraged if you share that in the church. And so I didn't share it because I respected my pastor. And on the day after the vote, my pastor stood in the doorway. I was so upset. I never wanted to go back to church again, and I will never forget it. His name was Randy. He came out to the foyer and waited until I came through the door to give me a hug and to make sure I knew that he was sad that it didn't work out. And I found out that his sister was a staunch supporter of women's ordination, and she
Wow.
became a very good online friend to me. And I think a pastor like that makes all the difference in the world,
Yeah.
because he never shamed me for what I wanted or how I felt sad. He
Mm,
never
mm,
treated me as less because I'm an overweight person who wore pants. I didn't dress in high heels and, fancy business clothes. He treated me with so much dignity and respect.
mm,
That's the reason I still feel like an Adventist, even if I don't agree with everything,
mm.
because of people like him.
Yeah.
And I think if you really look at any denomination you go to, it's going to come down to the people who meet you at the door. How do
Yeah.
they treat us when we
That's
come through the
true.
door?
Mm,
When you lose someone, when things are bad,
mm.
you know?
And there's a lot of incredible Adventists. There's a real heart.
Yes.
They've a lot of Adventists, because they've been through the quagmire and the confusion and all the kind of tussling backwards and forwards and the opposition from the traditional Adventists and the progressive Adventists and the Fordites. Because of that
Yeah.
kind of tension, it is kind of, what's the word, crafted or molded. You stumble across one of
Yeah.
these genuine Adventists we're talking about. They're a very unique and beautiful person.
I'm One way that I finished this book was I got on ancestry.com and I met cousins that my mom never introduced me to, that were her cousins from her generation. And they were brother and sister, and they're just the nicest, most wonderful people. But they had left the church a few years ago. So my mom and dad didn't bother to tell me about them because, they're no
They're not
longer with
Adventists.
us. We don't
Yeah.
need to know about our family
Mm,
that's not in the church.
mm.
And I think sometimes when I'm having conversations with my cousin, he was the one that helped me finish this book, by the way. He read my first book. Oh, my mom, I never showed my books to any of my mom's relatives. I wasn't trying to get any of them to read. But she got on Ancestry and then she said, "Oh, I saw you had a book. I bought a book. I bought your book." And I was like, "Oh no." And then, my mom was sick with cancer for the last year. And I
Mm.
didn't want my mom to, hear anything, but she was really kind not to say anything to my mom. And she told her brother to read the book, and her brother read the book. And then he said, "I read your book. I want to know what happened next." So I wrote him an email telling him what happened next. Then that was the next chapter. And then he wrote me back, said, "Now what happened next?" And this happened every week. I wrote him a new chapter, and that's how I finished
Oh,
to Uneating.
wow.
And the reason I did that was because my mom and dad did not support me, but these cousins who left the church did support me. And he sometimes doesn't understand why I would still hang out with Adventists. He's just like, let's get out of there. And but the thing is it's the culture I grew up in. I can't change who I am. I just grew up with this mindset with these people this is my culture. These people who get together on Friday night around candles and sing songs and pray. It doesn't matter to me if they're Baptist or if they're Pentecostal. I just like that. I like having a set time that we get together and worship and pray. I like knowing that there's a place to buy Big Franks down the street. It's just, I'm a cultural Adventist, like a lot of people are cultural Jews, I think. I don't think we can change who we are all the way when we've been completely raised. And some people are pretty bitter and angry. And I'm not bitter and angry. I'm not bitter and angry with my parents, and I'm not bitter and angry with the church. But I do have my own mind, and I have had a great education recently, from reading a lot of different books that I never dared to read before.
That you didn't read because at the time you felt
Because
Ellen
I
White had
was
said
afraid.
don't read that. Yeah.
Yes. And also, I would say Steve Daly's psychobiography of Ellen White was really eye-opening to me. And I think the thing that really bothers me is how Ellen treated Fanny Bolton. I don't think I'm ever going to get over it.
I think
sorry.
that treatment sent her to the asylum.
I know, and took away her boyfriend and treated her like she was some, terrible person because she was in love with a man who was already separated from his wife. I mean, and she questioned, and she knew what plagiarism was. Fanny did, because she was a journalist to begin with. So I'm sorry, but there's things there I can't swallow. And, I'm never going to be able to swallow it. I'll never be able to. In the way that someone treats another person, the way they use their power, slapping Fanny in the face was a misuse of power.
Did she actually slap her in the face?
Well, somebody said that. I asked George Knight, and he said, yeah, it's problematic. Every time I asked George Knight about something that Ellen White did that she shouldn't have done, he's like, yeah, it's problematic. And, he's a nice guy. He really is.
Yeah.
But I think he does this, standard thing that the Adventists do.
Yeah, he's definitely an Adventist apologist. I interviewed him in season 2. If people are in the Facebook group, they can go and watch that. It'll be on YouTube soon. I'm slowly uploading season 2 to YouTube. And he kept saying to me, "Oh, you're asking all the wrong questions. You're asking the wrong questions." And I thought, I'm the worst person to tell that to. But I really liked him, and I've enjoyed his material over the years. But he does seem to me to be a dyed-in-the-wool Adventist apologist. And you can read between the lines, and you can learn a lot of stuff, and he can wield a lot of damage to the Adventist church. But all the while his thrust is to stay an Adventist, bring about change within, and he loves to talk about putting things in context, etc.
Yeah, and he also
do you
had
see
a
him regularly? Do you? Is he go?
No,
to
I
your
don't. I don't
church?
live there anymore. But
Right.
I've eaten in his house. He's eaten in my house. One time they had the flu, and I baked them homemade bread and apple pie, and I made a dinner for them and took it to them. Look, I love those people, but they disagree with us on LGBTQ. And George had a sermon not too long after we got divorced in which he said that back in Bible times, a gay man would get a wife to be respectable. Look, Peter, that threw me into a tizzy of sobbing because my husband and I just got divorced, and it was as if my husband was only married to me to look respectable. I know the love between my ex and I, and the friendship that is deeper than any other family relationship I've got. I knew that wasn't the truth. He felt forced into it by the way the church's standards are. And then George went further to say, and then if they didn't, after they had their lover on the side on top of the wife to be respectable, if they wanted a boy, then they had a boy too. I was very angry about that. I told George that I was very upset. I sent him a text, and then my husband sent him a text, and he told my husband that there wasn't a place for him in this church. He basically said, well, basically they're, and the next week, my ex wrote a letter and asked for his membership to be removed. This is not how Jesus would handle it. I'm sorry.
That's incredible.
So F George Knight.
So wow, that's
sorry.
Incredible. So that really was
broke
the
my heart.
turning point for your husband at the time
And it was a
to take
turning
his
point for
name
both
off
of us.
to leave the
I
church.
didn't ask to have my name taken off yet, but the truth is I don't think that people will think of me as a diehard Adventist anymore, because I'm just dabbled into too many other things, as far as ecumenicalism and, questioning too many things. But the truth is I love the church. I love the people that I grew up with and the people that I've known and the people that I went to college with. I can't stop loving people just because we don't agree about, say, Ellen White. I can't just cut people out of my life because they still go one direction and I go another, whether that is leave the church or whether it is fall deeper into a chasm of, the fringe, like my father. By the way, my mom, she just died in April. Almost until the day she died, she was worried about her salvation. She was constantly worried about her salvation. And you know who I blame? Ellen White. She was so worried about her salvation, she had to get rid of every sin. She was worried about all her children and grandchildren not being in heaven. And I kept saying, Jesus knows them more than you. She felt she had to stay alive to pray for us. Because obviously I'm not a good enough Adventist. There's other people that are in her category worse, probably, but like my brother's an atheist. so she had this big burden to stay alive to pray for us. It's not how God would want us to be, and she
It's
should have
not
had
healthy to
peace.
live your whole life, as you say,
No.
because of Ellen White, sort of her teaching.
And
No matter how much grace you can bring into Ellen White, the overwhelming weight of her material is you have to get to a certain level before you're going to cross over into heaven. There's just no doubting that. There's no doubting the weight of her material is legalistic.
my dad's living in a nursing home, but he's still trying to figure out how to get a cabin in the woods to be ready for the time of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
How can you help somebody like that? It's really sad. So I see the fruit of this, and it hasn't been good.
Yeah. I'm reminded of my interview I did with Tyler Morgan. I think, I'll just see if I can see here. I interviewed him about a week after he left the Adventist Church. It's season 8,
I
episode
saw that.
12. Yeah, so not that long ago, Tyler Morgan. And I can't remember what he said, but he said something in that interview that made me realize that even for cultural Adventists, aligning yourself to something along the lines of Ellen White being almost blasphemous, that just attaching your name to it, he couldn't do that. And I fully understand the cultural Adventist. I was a cultural Adventist most of my life, to be honest. And the women's ordination thing was really just the last straw. But and I still love hanging out with my Adventist friends, and I found that even though I've left, I can maintain all that kind of contact. I thought I was going to be dead to them, but it turns out I'm not, and that's nice. That's good. That's wonderful. But yeah, there is that feeling though that if you leave the church, something is not going to be the same anymore, and perhaps that's true, and that's why a lot of people do just stay, even though they don't agree with Ellen White or not. But in the comments, like I was just watching a lot of the comments, there's so much support for you and what you're doing, and it almost means it's not like anyone has to be forced to move to a certain position or point. Adventist, former Adventist, not, like you say, they're finding this sense of meaning again in your life and purpose, and founding it on what your faith that you decide is. They're perhaps the most important things. And you can feel, as I'm watching these posts, there's agnostics, Adventists, former Adventists, all loving what you're doing. So whatever has happened,
it's because we're kindred spirits.
Yeah, you've come to a place where what you're doing is offering insight and meaning and purpose to others, and I think probably giving you a lot of sense of meaning and purpose too.
Yeah, the thing is we are all victims of certain mentalities in the church at one time. A victim is a child, someone who has no control. And then we grew up and we got power and we found out, you know what, I don't need to put up with this. I don't need to stay. I don't need to let somebody drag me down because I don't see the same as them. And I think that's where the kindred spirit comes out, because we are survivors of a war, survivors
Mm.
of a mentality, survivors of some sorts of abuse. That message is a young people thing.
Yeah.
All you have to do is hold the book up, and there's 30 people that have a sad story to tell you about that. And
Mm.
that's who we are. And so you wouldn't have that if you were holding that up in a Baptist church or a Mormon church or a Pentecostal church.
That's true.
Only here in this place do we understand our disgust of messages to young people and our love of Big Franks.
Yeah,
And
wow,
so that's
it's
why
so true, yeah.
out of the can. But anyway,
Yeah.
we were having a comment on
We've
somebody's Facebook feed the other day. I said, yeah, we ate them like savages right out of the can. And a whole bunch of people were liking that, because this is what we have in common. And I used to say, I think I'm a Big Frank eater, because when I lived in College Place, sometimes I would sneak to the store down the road on Sabbath while everybody was in church and go buy a can of Big Franks. So I wasn't a good Adventist. I was just a Big Frank eater. My sister and I, my youngest sister and I would do that. We would laugh and say, we're the Big Frank eaters.
I like it. Yeah,
Anyway,
I love there's a few things in this conversation that have been really impactful on me, that sense of, yeah, we are kind of finding each other, and we're all, those of us that have had this shared experience become kindred spirits. And I see that
yeah,
permeating through every kind of Adventist, former atheist,
yeah,
agnostic. There's a shared journey there that we enjoy gathering together and talking about, and it's often good things and not so good things.
yeah.
And I like the sense of the elephant in the room. That just reminded me earlier, to next week, 6:30 Tuesday Pacific time, which just is an hour later Mountain and an hour later Central and an hour later Eastern. I'm interviewing again Brian Newman, who wrote The White Elephant. In the White Elephant
Interesting.
in Seventh-day Adventism, and it
I'm
wasn't
going to read his
planned.
book.
It wasn't planned in any way that we had yesterday's kind of very controversial interview backing onto yours, and then my interview with Brian next week. Tuesday 6:30 Pacific time, Wednesday 11:30 Sydney, New South Wales time, 12:30 New Zealand time. I'm throwing in New Zealanders there as well. It is a really good read as well, and I cannot wait to read your recent book. I'm just going to bring it up onto the screen again, because it's really taken off online, and I want to encourage everyone, like, for $5.45, the Kindle version, it's incredible value. I encourage everyone to kind of lean, like, just make a note of that, and as soon as we finish the interview, just lean into your computer and do two things: subscribe and like Facebook or YouTube SDAQ&A, and go into Amazon and buy that book. So in kind of closing, and I was going to say the other thing was, so the kindred spirit thing I really like. I love what you're saying about power, and not, can you kind of define that again? Not using your power to kind of
We don't use our power over others.
over others. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And
So
I
we have
really,
power, but to use it over others is a different thing.
yeah,
Now, we don't let other people use the power over us either in an unhealthy way.
no,
There has to be
exactly. You got to
mutual
have your
fairness.
boundaries. Got to have
Yeah.
boundaries. Got to be
I think that
discerning.
the
Yeah.
book I'm working on right now, Religious Narkia, I think it's going to cover a lot of this stuff. It's not a memoir. It follows a family in a church, no specific church, and it's about the narcissistic, patriarchal things that happen in a family. And I think that people will find it interesting. I will put it cheap on Kindle too, so that my Australian friends can
And
get it
watch.
without paying a
Yeah.
lot of money. You know,
sent
I went
me
to Australia, right? When
when?
it's in the stories into Uneat an Elephant when I was on the singing tour. That's where
Really?
that was one of the first. That was a pretty big thing in my life to go to New Zealand.
What was the group called?
I joined a singing group called Outreach for Christ International, and it was called the Reach Out Singers. And
Wow. So what year would you have come
didn't.
here?
It was 1988. In March of 1988. Oh yeah, that's my new book that I'm
Wow.
working on. It won't be
Thought
out
I'd
until later this summer.
I loved the cover, so I thought I'd share that.
Thanks.
It's a really
It's sort of like what happens
powerful.
when narcissism comes to church and dresses up in snarky religious clothes.
Yeah. I like it. And yeah, your tour of Australia in '88. I was in New Zealand, so that's why I wouldn't have
I was
heard
in New
about it.
Zealand too. I
Oh,
went to both.
really?
Yes, we went to Rotorua, we went to Auckland, we went to the South Island, into Nelson and Wangamatta. That was where we had
When you
our
sang
first
in
kiss at
Auckland,
Wangamatta.
oh, when you sang in Auckland, did you sing? It wasn't in an Adventist church. It was in a big.
No, but I will tell you that half the families in New Zealand had the Bible story and was reading it to their children. And
Yeah,
Sanitarium Foods was in everybody's. I
yeah,
felt right at home there
yeah.
in Australia
I
and New
do
Zealand.
think I went and saw that concert because I was
I don't
right
know.
into music in Auckland, and I
I can't,
remember a Christian group coming out from the States, and I remember it not being in an Adventist church. It was in a kind of quite big
yeah. And
venue
we had
there
a
in Auckland.
drummer.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we went to Kiwi Ranch. And Kiwi Ranch is like a summer camp. I don't know if they still have it, but we went there for a weekend too. It was for
Is that
Easter weekend for
in
them.
Toohey Ridge? I
I
think it
don't
might
know.
be called. Yeah.
It's I'm not,
Anyway,
I don't know the whole place,
we're
but I will
sidetracking.
say, and we also went to Tasmania and Melbourne, and
Yeah,
we didn't get to go to Sydney. We just flew over the
over
Opera House.
Sydney. Yeah.
I was disappointed
Oh,
I didn't get to go to Sydney. I would have
yeah.
liked to.
You would have
You
gone down
know,
very well in Sydney. Yeah.
I loved Australia and New Zealand. It was
Yeah.
like one of the biggest highlights of my life. I mean, I just loved it.
Great countries. Yeah.
Yes, really nice people. It was the
Yeah.
people. Except that the pizza had spaghetti on it when I was there, so that was a little weird.
Oh, I haven't heard about that.
But I had pavlova, so that made up for it, right?
Oh yeah, pavlova. Amazing. Amazing.
I even know how to make pavlova because I learned.
Oh, it's
An
beautiful.
apricot slice. My
Yeah.
host homes in Australia and New Zealand gave me some of their recipes, so I was just.
Did you try Vegemite
I
and Marmite?
actually thought to myself, I wonder if I could just live here and
Yeah.
not fly back home because it's so fun here. And so, but then I knew I would miss my family because I was very enmeshed with my family. So
You should come out on a speaking tour and when you've got your 4 books, your 3
well,
memoirs and this new one.
that would be
Um,
fun.
Come
Yeah,
and
who
I'll
knows?
help you organize a tour from Queensland to Victoria.
I know
On
that Bronwyn always tells me, I'll
Yeah.
show you the beach.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. She can be our road manager, make sure we're all organized.
Yeah.
So I said before there were 3 things that I really have taken from the today's chat. Lots of things, but the power thing, the kindred spirit concept that you're saying, and also I loved that Irish quote that you said.
In the
In
shelter of each other, the people live.
people live. Yeah, I love that. My wife's Irish, so I'm going to send her
Oh,
that. And
yeah, she does look Irish, doesn't
yeah,
she?
yeah.
Now that I remember pictures of her, yeah.
She is
She's pretty. She's a
dyed in the
beautiful
wool
woman.
Irish, and
That's beautiful.
and
Oh, and you liked what Maya Angelou says, we are more alike than we are unalike.
yes, I
These
was
are the
trying to
things
think of
that
the other thing. Beautiful. Yeah.
these are the places where we merge, our roads
Yes.
cross,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we go parallel or whatever with each other.
Yeah.
If we could remember this, if everybody, whether they're an Adventist or former Adventist, or they're a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, or they're a Baptist, who cares? If we could teach each other that in the shelter of each other is where the people live, and that we are more alike than we are unalike, we could stop polarizing people, and we'd have more empathy and love for
Yeah.
each other, like Jesus
Yeah.
wants us to.
Yeah. And even the word shelter in the shelter of each other, that kind of, I'm looking at also with myself and Barb and the girls. If they are in the shelter of her and I creating a safe space, that's where we all live. And
Yeah.
the concept there is that you're not just living, that's where you thrive as well. And
And
yeah,
just to be fair, let's say that is not an umbrella, because we know that those
yes,
people who
yeah,
support male headship try to put an umbrella over the wife and say the husband's over the wife and then the
yeah.
wife's over the children. We're not talking about that kind of a
No,
shelter.
no, no.
We're talking about a cozy shelter, like when you're in a bomb shelter and everybody's
Yep.
holding hands
Together. Oh,
and
yeah.
cuddled up
Yeah.
together, praying
Yeah.
and singing,
Yeah.
Shelter. Shelter
Yeah.
gives us a safe place to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
love it.
that's what my ex and I did. We gave each other safe places, and
Mm,
that's why our friendship had endured. He
mm.
gave me a safe place. He's more of my family than anybody in my family that I'm blood related to.
Yeah. I
And
loved meeting him
I'm
earlier, and it's a pity we couldn't have had him on
he's
the show.
a
Maybe
really
next
sweet guy.
time.
Well,
Maybe
he
next
had to go
time.
out with his husband, but
Yeah.
so he can hang out. But it's okay. They support me.
Yeah. Cindy Lou wrote, "If everyone is a shelter, then
True.
shelter really isn't needed." But the issue is that
That'll probably
when
be the new
when
world.
children when we're growing up in this world, we often don't have the skills to offer. I'm using this is not an umbrella. This is shelter. Um, Shelter from the Storm is a great Bob Dylan song. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, a
love.
lot of people are out in the storm, and there's always going to be people that need shelter. And
And I like the idea of a blanket fort. I saw a saying
yeah,
once that said, "You are such a good friend. You can always be in my blanket fort." It's a
yes,
little,
yes.
it's a childish thing, but
One of
you
my
know,
enduring memories is Dad only in the last year or two in our sunroom just over here, um, outside my studio. Is he built one of those little shelter forts with all the blankets, and I walked in and they're all laughing and giggling, and there he is. I can see him on his hands and knees, head down inside the sheltered blanket area, and they're all having a great time. And that kind of is another metaphor for what we're talking about as
yeah.
well. Do you know?
It's just,
I've, I just want to make a quick plug, not a plug for anything product wise or at all, but or program. But if anyone's watching that feels they've got a skill of kind of editing together some of my long interviews, I'm putting together a series of short highlights of interviews. If you feel called and skilled at doing that, give me a call, because today is the kind of interview I would love to have someone go through and go, there was a bit of gold, here's some gold, put them all together into just a 20-minute kind of video.
yeah,
And then we'll put a link to the longer one. I really need someone that I can do that myself, but I just don't. I, I've got the skill and I probably got the
yeah.
time, but I'm so unorganized. I just have to go live, boom, there it is, and then it's done. But
There's
this,
probably a young person who's really
yeah,
fast at doing
that's
that.
what I'd need, and they just go through. Someone
Yeah,
actually did one for me, and that got me really thinking, because I'd been wondering how I could do it. So if someone's
yeah,
watching, just message me, and basically you'll have to, condense some of these longer form interviews. Well, they're all long, but condense them into just 10, 20 minutes, because some of the stuff today, I'd love to just say, oh, you've got to see what Cherilyn said there at 1 hour, 55, 20 seconds. But, it would be so good to just condense it. And then people can go, oh, good. Now I want to listen to the whole thing, and we can provide links. So
yeah.
that's just something that popped into my head anyway.
They say shorts is how you can grow your YouTube followers.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just started a YouTube channel, but I don't really have it like you do. I'm not doing it for that reason. I just did it so I could make a couple of videos that I wanted to
Yeah.
make.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not trying to get a big following or anything. I mean, I'm just goofing off around there.
Yeah. Yeah.
My art is in writing. I have to write, and I can't spend all my time playing with videos.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all
We
not
have to
called,
choose.
but we're all, yeah, we've got to choose between the creative endeavors we love.
Yeah. Life is short.
Yeah. Hey, well, look, my
So
very special guest today has been Cherilyn Christen Clough. Just say it for me. I just want to make sure I am pronouncing that correctly. Having known you for 10
Cherilyn
years.
Christen Clough.
Yep, good. Yep, getting it very close. Author of Chasing Eden and To Uneat an Elephant. Go and find them on Amazon today. You will not you will have made a great decision to go and do that. You will not be disappointed.
Thanks.
And those of you that want to support the channel, something you can easily do is just, as I said earlier, lean forward, click the subscribe button. It really helps with the algorithms that we've just been talking about. If you'd like some of my music, you can listen to some of the songs I play as intro. Just go and scan.
I love those songs.
Thank you. Thank you for that. People can just scan that QR code and listen for free, or you can find it on iTunes and buy them if you like as well. And just one last thing there. If you'd like to support my channel, send a few dollars so I can buy a coffee. There's a QR code for that as well. Well, I would love to have you back on the program again, and let's talk about the 2 new books. When do you think you'll have that one with the wolf on the cover out?
I think probably by the end of the summer. It's been in process for a long time, just like this other book has been. But I found the freedom after my mom passed away, because I don't have to worry about what she thinks or her being disappointed. And I guess I just got set free, and I just started writing and writing and writing, you know.
That's great. I mean, to have that kind of sense of freedom and put it into a creative endeavor and make it available publicly.
And it's not because I don't love my mom. I think if people read these 2 memoirs, they'll know I love my mom. You know?
Yeah.
It's my love story to her in a way, in some ways, the way I portray her.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. It's been so good talking to you. Is there
Thank you.
anything you wanted to close off with? Any
No,
final words of wisdom?
I had a great time. It was really nice chatting with you, and I really enjoy the people that seem to hang out here with you. So that's really great too. And
yeah,
hope everybody has a good day.
We're building a great little community, and
It
long
is.
may it live.
Thank you, Peter.
Catch you later, and we'll talk very soon, Cherilyn.
Okay.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.